Welcome to another episode of History's Weirdest, where today we're stepping back, quite literally, into the Middle Ages to answer a burning question. How far did medieval people really walk? Were they the marathon walkers of history? Or was travel more about the horse and cart? Let's lace up our boots and find out. Section 1. The Daily Trek. Imagine starting your day not with a quick car ride to work, but with a 5-mile walk. For medieval peasants, walking was not just a form of exercise, it was essential to complete the chores of life. Traveling from villages to fields, markets, and neighboring towns, an average medieval Joe might clock in anywhere from 15 to 20 miles on a busy day. That's right, no gym membership needed. In fact, walking was so necessary that villages were often spaced exactly a day's walk apart. This wasn't by coincidence, but a practical response to the day-to-day needs of medieval society. Whether fetching water, visiting a local shrine, or trading goods at the market, every step was a step towards sustenance and survival. The Middle Ages was a world on the move, sometimes literally involving moving one's entire life to another place. Teenagers from the countryside looked for work in the cities to make themselves more respectable marriage partners. Indeed, because the increased mortality rate of pre-modern towns made them population sinks, city growth necessarily meant high levels of immigration. Meanwhile, miners in the Schwarzwald had the freedom to decamp to new mines for economic or political reasons, and mill workers in England were in steady demand at new locations. Section 2. Pilgrimages and long journeys. Now let's talk about the medieval equivalent of a road trip, pilgrimages. These weren't just spiritual journeys, they were the ultimate test of endurance. People from all walks of life, pardon the pun, would travel short distances to local shrines or hundreds of miles to religious sites like Santiago de Compostela or Jerusalem. Sporting their best walking sandals and armed with just a staff, pilgrims would walk for months in search of penance and forgiveness, miraculous cures, to fulfill a vow or show gratitude, and perhaps a bit of medieval bragging rights. Pilgrimages required careful planning, immense physical stamina, and unwavering faith. Pilgrims embarked on these arduous journeys as acts of devotion, penance, or seeking divine intervention in times of hardship. Their destinations were holy sites renowned for their miraculous relics, sacred shrines, or associations with revered saints and prophets. With the threat of robbery, bad weather, and disease, these treks were fraught with dangers. Medieval people chose to travel together because, there's safety in numbers, right? Think of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and the social experience that came about with the mix of social classes and backgrounds that fostered a sense of community and a life on the road. Over time, the economic impact could be seen as these pilgrimage routes became hubs of commerce, with towns springing up to cater to the needs of travelers. Section 3. Highways and Byways of the Middle Ages. Now let's dive into the treacherous world of medieval road travel, where every journey was an adventure, and every pothole a potential disaster. Historian Kate Stevenson paints a vivid picture of a world on the move, where people weren't just commuting, they were picking up their whole lives and carting them off to new horizons. And let's be real, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Medieval road trips were more like a game of Russian roulette with a side of mud wrestling. Areas that benefited from Roman engineering, the famed Roman roads that withstood centuries of tromping soldiers and travelers, had an easier time with travel. Although, with the decline of the Roman Empire, the roads deteriorated and maintenance ceased. Most medieval roads that served as major trade routes might be paved with cobblestones, gravel, or wood, whereas less traveled paths might just be packed dirt, worn down by foot traffic. Places like Nuremberg, Germany started paving the roads from a relatively early date, but for most of medieval Europe, road building and maintenance were an expensive undertaking that small fiefdoms could not afford. Crossing rivers was another challenge for travelers on the road. Although some major cities featured stone bridges, crossing these often required paying a toll, which many peasants could not afford. However, the tolls collected at bridges and passes did contribute to funding some major road maintenance. For people on the move, walking was the most common mode of travel, with speeds averaging 2 to 3 miles per hour, or more if they had a pack horse to carry their belongings. According to Marjorie Nice Boyer, medieval travelers on foot could expect to cover around 30 miles a day. That's right, 30 miles of blisters, sore muscles, and questionable rest stops. Forget about hiking boots and memory foam insoles. Medieval folk were braving the elements in sandals and homemade foot wraps. Section 4. The Nobility. Traveling in style? While peasants were trudging through mud and muck, the medieval elite had a slightly different approach to travel: horses and carriages. But before you think they had it easy, think again. Traveling by carriage in the Middle Ages was less luxury cruise and more extreme off-roading adventure, complete with bumps, breakdowns, and the occasional run-in with a rogue pothole. Medieval carriages were rudimentary by today's standards and offered little in the way of comfort. Suspension systems were primitive, meaning that every rock and rut in the road was felt. Moreover, carriages were prone to breaking down, and roads were poorly maintained, turning travel into a bone-jarring ordeal. The nobility traveled for several reasons, including leisure, to administer their lands, or to fulfill feudal obligations. They would often bring a considerable entourage, including servants, guards, and sometimes even entertainers. This not only made travel safer, but also more bearable. Peripatetic courts were common, with kings and their retinues traveling from one royal estate to another, not only to escape the monotony of court life, but also to exert royal authority over distant territories. This constant movement was necessary to manage the vast and often unruly domains. Each stop was an opportunity for the local nobility to present their grievances and pay their respects, thus reinforcing their strength and the feudal hierarchy. They moved between homes and royal courts, with princes often raised in castles they would never see again once they were crowned. While peasants might have to rough it on the cold, hard ground, medieval nobility got to stay with friends at country estates along the way. So while the nobility may have been traveling in more comfort than the average medieval person, their journeys were far from leisurely and involved a complex ballet of logistics, politics, and personal endurance. Each trip was an ordeal in its own right, woven with the perils and pageantry that characterized the medieval world. Section 5. The Challenges of Medieval Travel. Medieval travel was far from straightforward. Perilous roads, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of banditry meant that every trip required careful preparation and a hefty dose of courage. For those traveling by foot, the journey was especially daunting. Footpaths and roads could be treacherous, often little more than muddy tracks that wound through forests and over hills. With little to no drainage, flooded roads could easily turn into impromptu rivers and streams, transforming what was supposed to be a simple journey into an unwanted swimming lesson. Navigating these roads wasn't just about having a good sense of direction, it was about having the survival skills of a medieval Bear Grylls. Inns and resting places were about as common as a sunny day in London. Scarce and highly celebrated, travelers often had to rely on the hospitality of strangers or the protection of monastic houses that offered shelter to weary pilgrims. These places were not just stopovers, but lifesavers, providing a rare chance to rest, recover, and maybe dry off before continuing on their muddy, merry way. The journey was not just physically demanding, but also a mental test of endurance and faith, especially for those on spiritual pilgrimages. Imagine walking hundreds of miles, fueled by nothing but faith and the medieval equivalent of trail mix. Probably just regular nuts and berries, to be honest. Yet, despite these hardships, people of the Middle Ages were remarkably mobile. The desire for trade, political alliances, or religious salvation drove them across continents. From the frozen rivers of Scandinavia to the sun-baked roads of the Mediterranean, medieval Europeans were constantly on the move. Their journeys woven into the fabric of historical narratives that continue to fascinate us today. Whether they were trading, plotting, or just trying to find a bit of eternal salvation, these tireless travelers really knew how to rack up those medieval frequent flyer miles. Conclusion: a walk through history. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the wild and wacky world of medieval travel. Whether you were a peasant trudging through mud and muck, or a nobleman bouncing along in your fancy carriage, one thing's for sure: travel in the Middle Ages was anything but boring. Thanks for joining us on this journey through history on History's Weirdest. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell to catch all our historical hijinks. Until next time, keep stepping into the weird and wonderful corners of the past.